Mark gripped the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity, his knuckles aching from the prolonged tension, a physical manifestation of the emotional weight pressing down on him. Beside him, in the passenger seat, his ex-wife Sarah was slumped, deeply unconscious, her head tilted at an awkward angle against the headrest. A fragile, almost ethereal figure clad in a vibrant red dress, its rich fabric a stark contrast to the paleness of her skin, illuminated by the intermittent glow of passing streetlights. Her meticulously applied red lipstick, a defiant splash of color, seemed to mock the current stillness of her face, devoid of its usual animated expressions, while the delicate sparkle of her diamond necklace and earrings shimmered faintly, catching the ambient light and hinting at a world of glamour now veiled by the haze of alcohol. This scene was brutally familiar, a recurring nightmare of late-night calls and urgent rescues, a routine he had come to dread yet couldn't escape, for the sake of their son, Leo. Each rotation of the tires against the asphalt felt like a slow, deliberate turn of the screw, tightening the vice around his heart, a constant reminder of their fractured past and the uncertain future. He was a single dad, shouldering burdens that felt disproportionately heavy, especially when confronted with the raw vulnerability of the woman who had once been his everything. Now a stranger held together by fragile threads of memory and obligation. The air in the car was thick with unspoken resentments, with silent questions, with the ghosts of what they once were, and the specter of what they had become. Mark's eyes, a weary slate gray, were fixed on the endless ribbon of asphalt ahead, seeing not just the road, but the winding path of their shared history, dotted with moments of joy, piercing despair, and countless dashed hopes. He had rescued Sarah countless times from the precipice of her own making, believing each time it was merely another extension of his reluctant duty, a final act of kindness to a person he no longer recognized. Yet he was utterly oblivious that this particular somber drive home, this quiet, suffocating journey through the pre-dawn hours, was merely the quiet prelude to a seismic shift. He could not have conceived that the morning, when the first rays of sun would tentatively pierce the blinds of his modest home, would bring forth a conversation, a series of revelations, from the lips of the very woman sleeping beside him, that would not merely shake his world to its core, but fundamentally redefine everything he thought he knew about their broken family, about Sarah, and about his own resilience. The gravity of her unspoken words, waiting dormant until the light of day, held the power to unravel long-held assumptions, expose hidden truths, and ultimately force a reckoning that would either shatter them irrevocably, or, against all odds, forge an unexpected path toward a fragile yet undeniable form of redemption. This was not just a drive, it was the journey to an unimaginable new tomorrow. The call came, as it had so many other times, in the almost deafening silence of the night, around 1 a.m, cutting through the fragile peace of a restless sleep. The shrill ring of the phone, a sound that once heralded joy, had become nothing but an alarm, a familiar siren of trouble. The screen lit up his face, a pale glow that highlighted the deep shadows beneath his eyes and the worry lines etched into his brow. He didn't need to see the caller ID to know who it was. The urgency and predictability of the situation were palpable. Even so, his blue-green eyes, meant to reflect the serenity of sleep, fixed on the name Sarah, as if searching for some new hint, some hope that this time would be different. A long, weary sigh escaped his lips, heavy with years of disappointment and the unrelenting burden of responsibility. It carried the weight of countless broken promises, of nights spent searching for her, of hard conversations with Leo. He hesitated, the device buzzing in his hand, each vibration an echo of his internal conflict. The temptation to ignore it was immense, to finally sever the cords binding him to this destructive cycle. But then, an image of Leo, his son, his entire world, floated into his mind, untouched by the storm engulfing his mother. Leo was the unbreakable link, the reason Mark kept reaching out even when his heart refused. He was Mark's moral compass, the lighthouse guiding him through the fog of his ex-wife. Sarah may have unraveled the family they built, but Leo was the constant reminder that something good still remained, something worth fighting for, even if it meant facing Sarah's demons once more. With grim, reluctant resolve, he slid his finger to answer. The soft click opened a portal to another night of uncertainty, another rescue, another test of his unwavering devotion. Not to her, but to the innocence and well-being of his son, sleeping soundly in his room, unaware of the silent battle his father fought in the dark of night. He found her, as expected, stumbling pathetically on the cold sidewalk outside a downtown bar, a scene that had become far too familiar. The bar's flickering neon sign cast intermittent light across her figure, exposing every detail of her fragile state. The pungent smell of alcohol and smoke, a nauseating mixture of excess and despair, hung heavily in the air around her, betraying the extent of her night. Her dark hair, usually sleek and immaculate, was disheveled and tangled, cascading over her pale, makeup-smudged face, and partially hiding the eyes he knew would be vacant and unfocused. And yet, even in her disarray, the expensive red dress she wore still exuded the aura of a lost sophistication, her diamond jewelry glowing faintly in the dark, tiny points of light that stood in stark contrast to the darkness surrounding her. They were remnants of a life of glamour, a fleeting glimpse of the vibrant woman she once had been, now buried beneath the weight of addiction and sorrow. Mark approached, his heart heavy with a mixture of compassion and resentment. A dance he knew all too well. Gently, but with practiced efficiency, he helped her into the passenger seat of his car, his movements soft yet firm as he guided her slack body. Each step she took was uncertain, every motion and effort against gravity and the alcohol in her system. He positioned her carefully, making sure her head rested comfortably. Then, with a gesture that had become almost instinctive over the years, he reached over and clicked the seatbelt across her, a routine act he wished he never had to perform again. It was an act of protection, yes, but also a bittersweet reminder of his ongoing role in her life, a role he felt he could never truly abandon no matter how hard he tried, always pulled back into the depths of her problems, always her reluctant guardian in this relentless cycle of rescue and disappointment, all for a greater good. A future he still longed for his son, Leo. The silence in the car was a heavy, almost suffocating burden, broken only by the dull hum of the engine and the distant whisper of the sleeping city. It wasn't a peaceful silence, but an empty one, a melancholy echo of lost conversations and forgotten laughter. Mark kept his eyes on the road, the nighttime horizon seeming to swallow any hope of clarity, his face a mask of exhaustion and resignation. He stole a quick glance at Sarah, his heart tightening with a complex emotion he could no longer name. There was the woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, now reduced to a pale, vulnerable figure, a ghost of her former self, her head drooping helplessly, her sleep not a restful reprieve but a forced escape from reality. The glass, with an amber liquid barely visible in the center console, was a cruel symbol of her ongoing battle, a tacit reminder of the illness that had corroded her brilliance. The contrast between her elegant dress and sparkling jewelry and her unconscious state was painfully stark, a metaphor for the glamorous life she chased and the sad reality in which she was trapped. Mark watched the passing headlights, each one a separate, unknown life, while his own seemed eternally intertwined with Sarah's, even after the divorce. He wondered if she would ever remember these nights, these silent drives, the single father sacrificing his own rest to ensure her safety. Probably not. The fog of alcohol was an impenetrable barrier, shielding her from the consequences of her actions while leaving Mark to carry the weight alone. He felt a deep ache, not just for the woman she had become, but for the woman she could have been, and for the dreams they once shared, now shattered and scattered like broken glass. Sadness was a constant companion on these night journeys, mingling with a quiet rage over all the broken promises, the squandered chances, and the impact it all had on Leo. He longed for an end to this cycle, for closure, for redemption that always seemed out of reach. But for now, there was only the road ahead, the darkness, and the sleeping presence of his ex-wife. An enigma of pain and devotion, an unbreakable link because of his son. His gaze stayed fixed, but the outside landscape blurred, overlaid by a torrent of memories and resentments flooding his exhausted mind. Mark's hand, rigid and tense, gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white, the tendons standing out beneath his skin. That iron grip mirrored the contained emotion boiling inside him, a quiet, cold, persistent anger over years of futile arguments, promises made and routinely broken, and a divorce that dismantled his world. With every passing mile he relived the bitter echoes of harsh words, the slamming doors, the deafening silences that followed, the slow, painful erosion of what had once been a vibrant love. A bone-deep weariness weighed on him, not just the physical fatigue of a sleepless night, but the spiritual exhaustion of fighting a battle with no end in sight. He was a single father, a title he carried with pride and an immense burden, shouldering all the responsibilities Sarah had so casually and painfully abandoned. The to-do list felt endless, the demanding job that barely covered expenses, bills to pay, meals to cook, Leo's homework, bedtime stories, comfort in moments of sadness, the constant presence she could not be. All of that while managing her unpredictable calls and night crises. Yet beneath it all, under the layers of anger and exhaustion, a stubborn concern persisted. Not the concern born of romantic love, but the concern of a guardian, of someone who cares about the well-being of his child's mother, even when she refuses to care for herself. It spoke of a past that could not be erased entirely, of a bond that, however fractured, still existed because of Leo. And so, there he was once more, driving her home through the darkness. An act repeated that tested the limits of his patience and his capacity to forgive. A silent sacrifice to keep the fragile structure of his family standing. A tribute to his unwavering devotion to his son's well-being, which was, and always would be, his #1 priority, the reason he kept going despite everything. The dark expanse of the road seemed to fade, replaced by a vivid, if faded, picture in his mind. He remembered a time that felt like another life, an era when her joy wasn't a distant memory, but a palpable presence. He saw a younger Sarah, radiant, her eyes shining with a light that came not from glasses or late nights out, but from a genuine, overflowing happiness. Her laughter, once a constant melody that filled every corner of the house, now echoed only in the quiet corridors of his memory, a melancholy reminder of better times. He remembered the warmth of her hand in his, their fingers intertwined in a sunny park, the bright future that had seemed so certain, so tangible. They used to talk about their dreams beneath an endless blue sky, planning a life full of love, children, and adventure. That time, before addiction wove its treacherous web, was a lost paradise, a fairy tale that crumbled into hard reality. Her eyes, once full of promise and passion, now reflected the weariness and disillusionment that had become her constant companions. The image of them laughing together, carefree and full of life, was a subtle torture, a cruel comparison to the broken, sleeping figure at his side. He remembered how contagious her optimism had been, how she made him believe in a world where anything was possible. But addiction crept in like a dark shadow, slowly swallowing her light, warping her personality, stealing her shine. Small disagreements became major fights. Promises turned to emptiness, and the dreams they had cherished together shattered, piece by piece, falling like broken glass, impossible to mend. He felt a stab of pain, not mourning a death, but a loss, the transformation of a vibrant soul into a ghost of herself, trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. That image, soft and blurred by the mists of time, was a bittersweet reminder of what was and what could never be again, a poignant memory of a love that could not withstand life's storms and the darkness that fell over his beloved, leaving him to carry the memories of a lost paradise and the harsh reality of a lonely present. The shift from love and hope to the cold reality of a courtroom was abrupt and brutal. The divorce wasn't merely a legal formality, it was a painful amputation, a cut that severed a piece of his soul. He found himself in a stark, empty courtroom, the artificial light sharpening the chill of marble and dark wood, every echo of his footsteps resounding with the weight of loneliness. Mark stood in the foreground, a small, seemingly defeated figure, the sterile setting amplifying his insignificance before the immensity of the law. The divorce decree, a simple sheet of paper containing the words that sealed his fate, felt like a gravestone, marking the official end of everything they had built. It was not a consensual or amicable end. He fought desperately for Leo, for his son's stability, for the assurance of a safe home amidst the chaos Sarah had created. The courtroom became a battlefield, not over money or possessions, but over his child's future. While Mark clung to every fragment of hope for Leo, Sarah drifted away, her presence in the proceedings sporadic and apathetic. She seemed like a shadow, already consumed by her inner demons, her addiction serving as an impenetrable veil that insulated her from the consequences of her actions. Watching her so lost was almost as painful as losing the marriage. She was disintegrating before his eyes, and he was powerless to stop it. He was left behind to pick up the pieces of a shattered life, to rebuild a home for Leo, alone. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but he carried it with quiet determination, because with every step, every decision, every moment of despair, there was always Leo, the reason he refused to fall, the reason he kept fighting against a sea of sorrow. The austere courtroom symbolized an ending, but it also catalyzed a new beginning, one in which Mark would be his son's sole pillar, forcing him to find a strength he hadn't known he possessed. Being a single father was an unrelenting marathon, a life without pauses or a safety net, where each day was a test of endurance. The image of Mark, visibly tired yet present, leaning over the kitchen table late at night, helping a young Leo with homework, embodied his new reality. The ceiling light, dim and yellow, cast deep shadows over their faces, highlighting the exhaustion in Mark's eyes and the childlike focus on Leo's. In the background, the kitchen sink, piled with dirty dishes, stood as a silent testament to Mark's tireless work, a constant reminder that household tasks accumulated as relentlessly as responsibilities. His life was a delicate dance, juggling a demanding job that barely covered expenses, making sure Leo got to school on time, and, most importantly, comforting a boy who felt his mother's growing absence. Leo's innocent questions, "When is Mom coming?" were the most painful, each one a small dagger to Mark's heart, forcing him to invent explanations or excuses he knew wouldn't make sense to a child. It was a constant struggle to keep a smile on his face, to be a pillar of strength, while inside he felt himself collapsing under the weight. He could barely remember a full night's sleep. Dawn hours were filled with worries about tomorrow, and nights with the exhaustion of the day just past. And, as if that weren't enough, there was Sarah's unpredictability, the unexpected calls, the dramas, the rescues, all of it woven into his life, adding an extra layer of stress and uncertainty. Mark was a master juggler, balancing too many plates, always afraid one might fall. But each day, each challenge, each moment of extreme fatigue, he looked at Leo, at the innocence and unshakable faith in his eyes, and found a new reserve of strength. Single fatherhood was undoubtedly a constant, exhausting sacrifice, but it was one Mark would make 1,000 times over, because the reward, his son's love and happiness, outweighed any pain, any fatigue, any humiliation. It was proof of his unconditional love, a commitment he would never waver from, even when the world seemed to crumble around him, because Leo was his priority, his purpose, his everything. There were times, many times, when the difficulty of his situation spilled beyond the walls of his home, flooding into his public life with shaming impact. Mark found himself in a crowded school hallway, a place that should have been filled with childhood joy and parental pride, turned into a stage for his silent humiliation. He stood visibly embarrassed, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze averted, trying to blend into the background as Sarah's absence played out yet again. Once more, she had failed to pick Leo up from school. The explanation, always evasive and half-true, was relayed to teachers and, inevitably, reached other parents. Mark felt the eyes on him. Not open reproach, but veiled sympathy, a tacit knowing. Other parents cast looks that said more than 1,000 words, a mix of pity, understanding, and for some, a quiet, relentless judgment. They knew. They saw the consequences of Sarah's irresponsibility in their own children, in the disappointment in Leo's eyes, in the teacher's frustration. The unspoken judgment hung thick in the air, an invisible fog that wrapped around him, making him small and inadequate. He could sense the subtle gossip, the whispers traveling from one group to another, confirming the worst assumptions about his ex-wife and, by extension, the disorder of his family. It wasn't his mistake, but he carried her shame as if it were his own, a heavy burden he bore in silence. Each incident was a blow to his dignity, an erosion of his standing in the community. But above all, it was a painful moment for Leo, who waited anxiously for his mother, only to be disappointed again. Mark swallowed his humiliation, his anger, his despair to shield Leo from greater pain, to maintain a facade of normalcy and stability in an increasingly chaotic world. He endured the shame in silence, not for Sarah, but for Leo, because his love for his son was the only shield against absolute hopelessness, the only reason he showed up day after day to face the world and the silent criticism that came with it, for his sake. The cycle of hope and disappointment was a constant torment, a cruel dance repeating with excruciating regularity. In her sober moments, often seeming more fragile than he'd ever seen, Sarah made countless promises to change, to seek help, to become the mother Leo deserved. He watched her on video calls with Leo, her face on the screen looking sincere, eyes brimming with remorse, voice trembling with the gravity of her words. She spoke of enrolling in programs, of therapy, of a life free from addiction. Each promise sparked a fragile hope in Leo's heart, and admittedly, a small shaft of light in Mark's. He wanted to believe, longed with everything in him for her to finally break free. Yet Mark watched from the sidelines, a silent witness to a painfully familiar cycle of broken promises and unfulfilled vows. The skepticism in his eyes was a thin veil, a protection he had built over the years for himself and his son. He had learned the hard way that her intentions, however genuine they seemed in the moment, were often crushed by the overwhelming force of her illness. Each failure, each relapse, cut deeper into his already scarred heart, and more importantly, left a new wound in Leo's innocent one. Mark felt the weight of shielding his son from the pain of disappointment, of trying to cushion the blow of his mother's unkept promises. He had become a master at managing expectations, his and Leo's. He taught Leo to love his mother, to forgive her, but also to protect himself from her inconsistency, a lesson far too harsh for a child. It was a tightrope walk, balancing encouragement for connection against protection from pain. Mark knew he couldn't control Sarah's actions, but he could control how he and Leo responded to them. And so he continued to watch, to wait, to hope, but always with one foot in reality, heart ready to protect his son from a love as inconsistent as the promises that came with it. This scene was a microcosm of Mark's ongoing battle, the struggle between hope and reality, between forgiveness and self-protection, always with Leo's well-being as his supreme guide. The reason he would never give up completely, but would never allow himself to be fully vulnerable again. He finally pulled up in front of Sarah's imposing yet anonymous apartment building. The weak streetlights barely lit the entrance, and the silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of his own tired breathing. Helping her out of the car and into the lobby, he felt the familiar weight of responsibility, a sensation that clung to him like a second skin. It was a task he performed out of duty, out of a lingering thread of care, and above all, for Leo. But as he sat alone in the now silent car, engine off, the empty street's darkness enveloped him. He stared at the building's silhouette, feeling completely spent, as if his very life force had been drained. The fatigue was crushing, not just physical, but emotional. A wave of questioning washed over him, a swirl of doubts he tried and failed to suppress. Why did he keep doing this? Why did he allow himself to be dragged back into this exhausting routine, this dance of rescue and disappointment? Reason screamed at him to walk away, to finally free himself from the ties chaining him to a life of drama and uncertainty. He felt himself slipping away, his own dreams and aspirations smothered under the weight of her needs. The life he had imagined for himself, for Leo, was infinitely calmer and more stable than this chaotic reality. And yet the answer, though simple, was powerful and undeniable. For Leo. Always for his son. That truth echoed in his heart, an anchor amid his inner storm. Leo was the only reason he kept reaching out, the only reason he endured the pain and frustration. A father's love is unbreakable, a commitment that transcends divorce, hurt, and broken promises. Deep down he knew that as long as Leo needed a thread of hope regarding his mother, he would be there. A reluctant, yet unwavering guardian. The night's silence and the car's darkness stood witness to his quiet sacrifice, to a devotion that, though often invisible, was the foundation of his existence. And as he prepared to drive back home, to the peace of his own apartment, he carried not only fatigue, but also the stillness of hope. A glimmer that maybe, just maybe, something could finally change. For now, though, it was just another night and the promise of an uncertain tomorrow. But deep down, he knew the battle wasn't over, and he was ready for whatever came next. For his son, the next morning brought an unexpected break in Mark's exhausting routine. The sun had barely risen high enough to wash his apartment in a pale light, when a firm, unexpected knock sounded at his door. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor or the usual sound of a delivery. There was urgency, intent, in the knocking that jolted Mark from his morning lethargy. He opened the door, still half asleep, expecting perhaps a solicitor or a misdelivered package, but what he saw woke him instantly, shaking off the lingering grogginess. There stood Sarah on the threshold in the morning light, a figure markedly different from the one he had left in the car just hours earlier. She was sober, undeniably so, her eyes clear and focused, free of alcohol's cloudy veil. But it wasn't just her sobriety that shocked him. It was her composure. She was dressed simply, in understated clothes that contrasted sharply with the glamorous evening gown from the night before. A change that spoke volumes about her intent. Her expression was serious and resolved, an unshakable determination etched into her features. There was no trace of the fragility or shame Mark had grown accustomed to seeing in her post-crisis sober moments. In her hands, she held a crumpled letter. The paper aged and creased as if it had been kept and reread countless times. Her knuckles were white as she gripped it, a small detail that revealed the moment's gravity for her. Sarah's gaze was steady, locked onto Mark's, as if she were finally ready to confront not only him and their painful past, but herself. It was a seismic shift, so radically different from her usual behavior that Mark could barely process the scene before him. This wasn't the Sarah he was used to. This was a Sarah with purpose, with a message, with something of great importance to reveal. Her presence there, so unexpected and laden with meaning, marked a definitive break with the predictable cycle of their lives, signaling that the morning conversation Mark had anticipated in the darkness of the previous night, the one that promised to shake him, was about to begin. The air between them was charged with expectation and uncertainty, and with the promise of a truth that would change everything. A long-awaited turning point finally upon them, hovering in the quiet of the morning. The tense silence was finally broken by Sarah's voice, a sound Mark hadn't heard with such clarity and resolve in years. "Mark," she began, her voice at first a fragile thread but quickly gaining strength, tinged with a mix of deep remorse and a new striking determination. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or despair. They were tears of relief, regret, and a newfound hope. They slid silently down her face without breaking her composure or the firmness of her voice. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, Mark. For everything I put you through. For everything I did to Leo." Her confession, so direct and unadorned, hit Mark like a wave, silencing years of empty excuses. He listened, stunned, his initial skepticism beginning to crack under the authenticity of her words. Then she continued, her voice still steady. "I enrolled in a long-term program. This isn't another empty promise, Mark. I've started, and I'm committed." The news of her commitment to recovery was a seismic relief, an answer to prayers he hadn't believed he still had the courage to make. But what came next truly shocked him, and began to fulfill the promise of the title. "And I found this," she said, extending the crumpled letter he had noticed earlier. Her eyes, once filled with remorse, now shone with cautious but undeniable hope. The way she handed over the envelope, with the solemnity of someone delivering a long-lost treasure, made Mark's heart race. He took the paper, feeling the age-worn texture beneath his fingers, his gaze falling on an unfamiliar handwriting and a dusty seal. The anticipation in the air was almost unbearable. The revelation he'd been expecting, the truth that would shake his world, was not just about her sobriety, but something deeper, something hidden about to come to light. Her words, brimming with new resolve and a long-kept secret, unfolded an unexpected, profound truth, rewriting the narrative he had built for himself and his son, opening a door to a future he had never imagined possible. This was the morning he would never forget. The morning that promised not only answers, but a new beginning. Mark took the letter, his fingers hesitating for a moment before unfolding the aged paper. His eyes scanned the lines, and his face, once a mask of shock, began a remarkable transformation. The words on the page were not what he expected. They weren't more apologies nor pleas for help. It was an Old Testament, a legal document dated many years ago, left by a distant aunt who had died a decade earlier. The revelation was of a significant inheritance, a substantial trust, specifically left for Leo to be released when he turned 18. For years, the document had been forgotten, perhaps lost amid the turmoil of Sarah's life, or tucked away and simply overlooked. But now, in her search for a new beginning, Sarah had unearthed it, a dormant secret with the power to change everything. Mark's face shifted from shock to profound relief, then into a hopeful, genuine smile spreading across his lips and lighting his tired eyes. It wasn't just the money, though financial security was a blessing. It was the gesture. It was tangible proof of Sarah's new commitment, not only to her own recovery, but to Leo's future, to her role as his mother. Sarah explained, her voice soft but steady, that finding the letter had been a catalyst for her own change. It made her realize how much she had neglected, not only herself, but also her responsibilities to her son. She wanted to secure Leo's future, to give him the opportunities she had squandered, a powerful testament to her new, unshakable resolve in sobriety and motherhood. Her words were a balm to Mark's old wounds, a balm he hadn't known he needed. The inheritance for Leo was an unexpected gift, but the greater gift was Sarah's clarity and determination. This was the conversation that would shake him, not with pain or disappointment, but with overwhelming hope, with the sense that the vicious cycle of years could finally be broken. It was a new dawn, not just for Sarah, but for their fractured family, brought together by an act of kindness, a secret revealed, and the promise of a brighter future for Leo, a future that, until that moment, had felt impossibly distant. In that moment, as the gravity of Sarah's revelation settled, the weight of years of resentment and pain seemed at last to lift. Mark looked at Sarah not with the familiar mix of anger and pity, but with a new admiration, a glimpse of respect for the strength she had found. A small yet profound smile began to form on his lips, echoed by Sarah herself, whose eyes now glistened with tears of relief and sincere hope. It was a smile that spoke of forgiveness, not only for her but for himself, for having kept his heart locked away. In a gesture that felt spontaneous and inevitable, Mark opened his arms and embraced her. It wasn't a romantic embrace, but one of reconciliation, understanding, and the unbreakable bond that would tie them together forever through Leo. It was a moment of catharsis, of healing, of a new beginning for their fractured family. The scene radiated a tangible energy of renewal, the promise that, even after the greatest hardships, second chances were possible. Leo, though off-screen, was the invisible force binding them, the reason they had reached this point, and the inspiration for the future. This act of kindness, vulnerability, and brutal honesty from Sarah truly changed everything. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a realistic, hopeful beginning to a journey of recovery and rebuilding. Their story, a testament to human resilience and the power of family love, resonated with Mark's belief that no matter how dark the night, dawn always brings the promise of something new, something better. And so, to you who have followed their journey, if you believe in second chances, in the strength of forgiveness, and in love's transformative power, like this video to show your support. Share your thoughts and hopes in the comments below. Your perspective matters. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more uplifting narratives that explore the complexity of human relationships and the beauty of redemption. May Mark and Sarah's story be a reminder that hope is never lost, and that change is always possible, one step at a time, toward a brighter tomorrow.